Well, good morning. We are, of course, still studying in Matthew's account of the Sermon on the Mount, and we have got down to the beginning of Matthew chapter 7, into certainly one of the most taken out of context verses in all the Bible. And we'll read that and make some comments before we look at the whole thing, and that's Matthew 7 verse 1 that says, "Judge not that you be not judged." That's certainly one of the most quoted verses in all the Bible. This has been misused so many times by different people. You know, whenever church discipline was practiced or someone was teaching something in error, they didn't want anybody to point anything out that they were doing wrong, and they would say, well, you're not supposed to judge. Well, of course, that was been completely taken out of context during many discussions. It's been taken out of context. Because we are commanded to judge in many, many circumstances. And we're just going to look at a few of those verses before we get in further into Jesus' teachings there in the first 6 verses. First of all, let's go to a couple of places in 1 Corinthians. So if we'll turn to 1 Corinthians 2. And if someone, first of all, would read verse 15.
But he who is spiritual judges all things, yet he himself is rightly judged by no one.
He who is spiritual judges all things. So there's something, that about judging, where we're supposed to judge. Staying in 1 Corinthians, moving to chapter 5. What about verses 12 and 13? Someone would read 1 Corinthians 5, 12 and 13.
What have I to do with judging those also
who are outside? Do you not judge those who are inside? But those who are outside, God judges. Therefore, put away from yourselves the evil person.
Okay, there's about judging. And of course, those who are outside are lost. They're already lost because they have never repented and been baptized.
I think the most interesting
point there is, and it's probably one that we're going to make,
more than once here is,
why would I bother to judge those outside? I just bring them inside.
That's right.
and only judge those in here to keep them on the
Yeah, that's exactly right. Keep them on that straight and narrow. Let's go now, Galatians chapter 1, verse 8. Someone would go there and read that verse.
Angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be accursed.
All right, that means you've got to judge. You've got to know whether that person is preaching another gospel. That's judging. That's judging. And then probably one of the most well-known, 1 John chapter 4, verse 1. 1 John chapter 4, verse 1.
Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world.
All right, there's another case where we have to judge. We have to judge whether people are prophesying, teaching the truth, or not teaching the truth. Well, that's judging. That's something we have to do. Something that's very important. All right, let's go back to John this time. John chapter 7 and verse 24. Someone read that for us. John 7:24. These are the words of Christ.
Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment.
That's the kind of judgment. See, Jesus tells us we have to judge. All right? It's absolutely essential that we judge. But we have to do it right. There's a right way to judge and a wrong way to judge. And then lastly, let's go back to Matthew 7. And let's skip down for now to verses 15 and 16. We'll talk about those in a few weeks again, but look at 15 and 16 and look at what it has to do with judging. Someone would read that for us.
Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles?
Okay. There's some false prophets come to you in sheep's clothing. So there's the judging. You have to tell, is this really a sheep or is it a wolf in sheep's clothing? Well, that's judging. That's discernment. That's discernment. And there are others too. But I wanted to start out that way to show you that judging is commanded in many, many instances. So when someone says we're to never ever judge, they've obviously not read the New Testament, because the New Testament tells us that there are times we must judge, but it's how we judge. It's the method, the manner, the spirit. That's what he is talking about here. So let's go ahead now back in Matthew 7. Verse 2, for with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? So again, we're talking about judging and how it's to be done and how it's not to be done. And notice he's talking about brothers. All right, like Scott mentioned, people who are outside of Christ are already lost. They're already judged by God. They don't have any hope if they stay in that situation whatsoever. They are already lost. What we want to do is teach them the gospel plan of salvation. That's what we want. We want them to become Christians. We want them to be born again, to be saved, come into the body of Christ. And then we can practice what he's talking about here. So it is, again, about, just like the whole Sermon on the Mount, it's so much about our spirit and our attitude, our motivation behind what we do, whether it's worship, whether it's how we think about wealth, how we set an example. It's all about our spirit and attitude. We don't have the right spirit and attitude, the right motivation, if we're not sincere. He's going to be using the word hypocrite soon in our section. Then we're doing it all wrong and it's sinful. So that's why we have to be very, very careful. We want to be fair. We do. God, it says right here, God's going to use the same standard that we measure other people with. That's how he's going to measure us. Why are you judging? Are you just being self-righteous? Are you trying to make yourself feel better than other people, feel superior? Are you trying to knock people down? Is that the reason you're judging? If so, then that's the way God's going to judge you. But if you're judging to help people because you see they're on the wrong path, you're trying to save that individual, trying to help that individual, then that's how God is going to treat you. So this is how God is going to be toward us. That's why it's so important for us to have that right heart. Why are we saying the things we're saying? Why are we doing it? Why are we judging? He uses that word measure. He uses the word measure there. You know, when do we judge people on just how they look or where they're from or their parents or their income? You know, James warned about this. Let's go to James chapter 2 for a minute. And if someone would read, let's see, where is it? Yeah, verses 12 and 13. Remember, this is right after James talks about the two people that come into the assembly. You know, one looks rich and dressed nice. The other guy looks pretty poor. You treat the rich guy really well. The poor guy, you say, oh, well, you just go sit somewhere else. So read verses 12 and 13 of James chapter 2.
So speak and so act as though who are to be judged by the law of liberty. For judgment will be merciful to one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment.
All right, mercy triumphs over judgment. You know, we have to realize that nobody is perfect. We all have flaws. People have to put up with us. And we don't want to be like, you know, that story Jesus tells about those two men. And one says, well, at least I'm not like this other guy. That's what we have to stay away from. That's again, that wanting to feel superior and better and so forth than other people. You know, people have to put up with us. If you're married, you know what I'm talking. People have to put up with us. Denise has to put up with me. I do a lot of things I'm sure that she would probably rather I didn't.
Bobby.
What? Oh, I thought you were going to say amen, but go right ahead.
My wife's name. That's not the point. Actually, going to the west.
Okay.
Do you think one of the primary reasons this section is so
Often
misused
is the,
chapter and verse system?
because if verse 7, chapter 7, verse 1
Wasn't distinguished
separately,
Oh, I see
and
what
was
you're
part of
saying.
the entire
Yeah, I
paragraph.
looked at the whole
If you
paragraph
just treat
together.
this as a paragraph,
Yes, good point.
you
Yeah.
see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
We have to remember that
Yeah,
the chapter and verse system
yeah.
didn't come along to what, 800?
Yeah, it's long, centuries, yeah, that's right. That's a very good point. If that was all one paragraph, those first 6 verses, yeah, I think there would be a lot less of what you were talking about. That's a very good point. I hadn't thought about that, but I think that's very true. Because that one verse has just been kind of taken out, and the other's not even really looked at. Okay, you can't judge, period, ever, under any circumstances, because of what that verse says. But yeah, that's a very good point. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And because when we read verses 3 and 4, well, there's judging to do in verses 3 and 4. You have to judge yourself. He talks about the plank, the huge piece of wood in your own eye. So this kind of helps us understand the issue, the problem that Jesus is dealing with. So Jesus is picturing someone that's almost blind, basically, because he had this huge piece of wood in his eye. And he's trying to examine something really tiny in someone else's eye. Well, that's almost impossible to do. So that's the idea, I think, of why are you judging? It's important to judge if you're helping. You know, is that your purpose? To help? Not to make you feel superior. Again, it goes all the way back to your purpose and your motivation, your spirit and attitude. We need to have the attitude of verse 4. You know, I need to get the plank out of my eye, and I can help someone else. Because we do want to help other people. You know, we don't want to condemn other people for doing the exact same thing we're doing. Well, it's okay if I do it, it's not okay if you do it. I think that's part of what he's saying too. We have to stay away from that I guess we would call it self-righteousness. You know, the Pharisees were some of the worst about this, that Jesus, you know, you turn over to Matthew 23 and he just really goes after the Pharisees and the scribes for being hypocrites, because that's what they were doing. They were condemning other people for some of the same things they were doing. And by getting, like it says, by getting this huge piece of wood, piece of timber out of your eye, then you can help the other person. And we should be helping the other person. Well, this is something we need to do for each other. We need to do that. But it's all about, why are you doing it? Why are you doing it? Are you being a hypocrite like many of the Pharisees? Or are you doing it sincerely because you really, really want to help? That's what it comes down to. You know, we want to, you know, James would talk about looking into the mirror in James chapter 1 and looking at yourself. You know, there's two types of people when you look into the mirror. You look into the mirror to see what may be wrong that you want to fix, or you may just glance in the mirror and go away. You know, which is it? And of course, he's talking about looking into the Word. Do you look into the Word to see if you can, to try and be a better person? Or do you just kind of glance at a few verses and go on and say, yeah, I'm doing just great? So what's the, again, it's the motivation. Why are you doing it? Are you being sincere? Are you being self-righteous? You're being kind? You're being cruel? You know, there's all kinds of criticism. There's some that are constructive and some that are not constructive. And most of the time, it's about the attitude of the person getting the criticism. Are you really trying to help the other person, or just make yourself feel better? So it's one of those where we have to be really careful about our own attitude. So he uses the hypocrite word in verse 5, hypocrite. So there's where he's going after that wrong attitude. So he says, hypocrite. First remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Because we do want to remove the speck from our brother's eye. We want to help our brother. We really, really do. So, you know, confront yourself. You know, make that self-confrontation where you realize that, yeah, you're not perfect. You have flaws. You have issues. You have problems. You have shortcomings. Judge yourself first, and then you can judge others better, because you want to judge others how you want to be judged. You know, people have given me criticism two different ways. Some that's been with a really good heart and helpful, and some just to be critical. So how do you want to be judged? Well, the way you want to be judged is the way you need to judge other people. And that's what we need to do. That's what everybody needs to do. Measure yourself. You know, that same type of judgment, that same type of spirit. I want someone to judge me mercifully. Well, then I need to judge other people with that same type of mercy and care and compassion, because I love that other person. That's why I'm doing it. I'm doing it out of love, because I'm concerned about the other person. So I don't want to make false judgments, or I don't want to see something that's not really there. I'm just being critical. I don't want people to treat me that way. I want people to be fair and honest and caring. So it's just as much about spirit and attitude as it is anything else. So he ends this paragraph by telling us about judging. And he makes some pretty straightforward, stark statements here. So he says, do not give what is holy to the dogs. nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces.
So,
This shows that judgment is essential. Judgment is essential. This goes back to what Scott says. If everybody read that whole 6 verses as one paragraph, they would realize that, yes, you do have to judge. I mean, we have to make judgments all the time. But it's the right kind of judgment. So in verse 6, judgments are important. We do have to make evaluations. We do have to make discernments. There are people, and I'm sure you've met them because I've met many of them, who have absolutely no interest in spiritual things or in the gospel whatsoever.
Jesus is calling them dogs. He's calling them swine.
He's calling them pigs. He says,
Do not waste your time on them. Don't waste your time on them. Because
they can turn and tear you to pieces. Well, that's pretty graphic. That's pretty graphic. And of course, dogs in the first century were scavengers. They weren't pets. They were scavengers. They were vicious.
And
swine, pretty much the same way. Hogs can be very, very vicious. They can
be violent. They can tear things up
pretty easy.
So Jesus is making a warning about judging.
Because he says if you don't judge right, then it can come back and tear you up. So we're having to judge people's spiritual condition. That's what we're doing, Are they antagonistic to the gospel? Are they antagonistic to God? Are they antagonistic to religion? Antagonistic to church? So many people today are getting away from any type of religion. There's a whole new type of movement in America where, they come to meet in a church building, but it's not really religious. There's a word for these meetings. I was reading about them yesterday. I don't remember what they were called. I should have. But people are actually forming groups and meeting, kind of like we are this morning, but it's not in a church type setting. They don't sing hymns. They are simply talking about social issues and those type of things, and how to be, in their minds, better people. But it's not any type of religion. These are people that don't want anything to do with religion of any kind or any stripe. And so these are cropping up all over America. And I just wish I could have remembered what they were called. But these are becoming pretty popular because people don't want anything to do with what we're doing this morning. They don't want anything to do with that.
Those people,
we would be wasting our time on. There are people that we won't waste our time on. That their spiritual condition is such that they would be willing to listen. That's judging. We have to judge, Jesus says, between people who would be willing to listen and people who won't listen. And there are both groups. So he says, don't give what's holy, because what you have is holy. And like he says, don't cast your pearls. Pearls, he talks about pearl of great price later in some of his parables. Don't do that. Is your help going to be helpful? That's a judgment.
That's a judgment. Is your help going to be helpful?
Yeah, sometimes you don't know, but sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes you can tell in the first 2 minutes if someone is really concerned or if someone is just wanting to argue or tell you how wrong you are, whatever. All right? That's when you walk away. That's what Jesus says. Walk away. Don't spend any time, because he says it's useless. He says it's useless. Hogs, if you gave a pearl to a hog, would he appreciate the value of it? Well, of course not. Yeah, wouldn't appreciate it at all. So you would be, again, giving something very valuable to someone who is wasting. He says there's others that would take that in and appreciate it. Appreciate it very much. So he says that's what you have to do. Proverbs 23:9, I think, really goes along with that, if someone would read that. Proverbs 23, verse 9. And then we'll go to Acts 13, and that will pretty much take up our time. Proverbs 23, verse 9.
Do not speak in the hearing of a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of your words.
Right? That's what Jesus is saying here with the hogs and the dogs. You're wasting your time with a fool. Because what's he going to do? He's going to despise what you're telling. He's going to despise it. And now, let's finish with Acts 13, because this is an example in Paul's life of what Jesus is talking about. Acts 13, and let's begin, let's see, verse 40-something here. Yeah, would someone read 44 through 46? Acts 13, 44 through 46.
On the next Sabbath, almost the whole city came together to hear the word of God. But when the Jews saw the multitude, they were filled with envy.
And contradicting and blaspheming,
They opposed the things spoken by Paul. Then Paul and Barnabas grew bold and said, it was
necessary that the word of God
to be spoken to you first, but
since you rejected it and judge yourselves unworthy of
everlasting life, behold, we turn to the Gentiles.
See, that's what Paul and Barnabas figured out. They figured out, okay, we're wasting our time here. And it wasn't because of anything Paul and Barnabas did. It was because of the spiritual condition of those Jews. You know, he says, you reject it and judge yourselves unworthy. See, it was their decision. And so Paul said, okay, I'm not wasting any more time on you. This is obviously a waste of time. So we're doing what? We're turning to the Gentiles. And hopefully their spiritual condition will be such that they will want to listen. You all don't. So you heard the word of God, you rejected it, you blasphemed, like he says. So you opposed everything we said. So that tells me I'm wasting my time. So no more. And so he turned away from the Jewish people, started preaching and teaching to the Gentiles. So there was just an example of what Jesus is saying there in Matthew 7, verse 6. Don't cast your pearls before the swine. Don't give what's holy to the dogs. So that's what Paul was doing. He was practicing the teaching of Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount. This is what you need to do. Well, does anybody have any comments? Next week we go into some more of what we need to be doing, asking, seeking, knocking, and the importance of that. And then, of course, into the narrow way. Anybody, any comments? Otherwise, we'll go get those two. Bring them in here. All right. Well, thank you very much.